The morning of April 23, 2016, started like any other for an experienced fisherman who knew every corner of Whiskey Bay, Louisiana. The salty scent of the water mixed with the crisp morning air, while the first rays of sunlight painted golden reflections on the calm river surface. He rowed leisurely, attentive to the slightest movement, until something unusual caught his attention. Among the twisted branches emerging from the water, there was a strange shape, pale and motionless. His heart raced, and his trembling fingers barely managed to hold his phone as he dialed emergency services. His shaky breathing and faltering voice betrayed the terror that consumed him. The arrival of the police brought an eerie silence to the idyllic landscape, now transformed into a scene of horror. The officers, accustomed to dealing with tragedies, could not hide their shock at what they found. The body of a woman, completely unclothed and partially submerged, told a dark story. The bruises on her neck and head suggested that she had not drowned by accident. Someone had left her there, trying to erase traces of a heinous crime. The cool morning breeze was not enough to dispel the suffocating feeling that hung in the air. As the scene was examined, it became clear that the victim had not ended up there on her own. The tangled branches that held her suggested that the body had been thrown from the bridge above, plunging lifeless into the dark waters. The investigators exchanged worried glances, aware that they were facing a case that demanded urgent answers. The mystery surrounding the nameless woman was only beginning, and the quiet town of Whiskey Bay would never be the same. Questions swirled in their minds. Who was she? How did she end up there? And most importantly, who had committed such an atrocity? The police worked tirelessly to uncover the identity of the woman whose violent injuries told a harrowing story. The body had been affected by its time in the water, but the hands still preserved fragments of her identity. Fingerprints were carefully collected and sent to the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab. The following hours were filled with tension. Who was she? What was she doing so far from any populated area? As they awaited the results, the investigators couldn't shake the feeling that this case would be darker than they had initially imagined. Finally, the answer arrived. The victim was Elizabeth Ferrell, a 28-year-old woman from Humble, Texas. The confirmation sent a wave of shock through the investigation team. Elizabeth was not just another name in a report. She was a mother of 2 young children who lived more than 250 miles from where her body was discovered. How did a young mother with an apparently normal life end up in the murky waters of Whiskey Bay? The news quickly spread throughout the Humble community, leaving friends and family devastated. The question echoing in everyone's mind was the same. What had happened to Elizabeth? The revelation of Elizabeth's identity opened a floodgate of questions. Her family, heartbroken, wondered about her final days. Her co-workers remembered her as a dedicated and loving woman, while neighbors recalled seeing her coming and going, always with her children in tow. The shock of her death resonated beyond the borders of her hometown, and the police knew this was just the beginning of an investigation that would bring uncomfortable truths to light. The mystery was only deepening, and the search for justice had a long way to go. When the detectives reached out to Jonathan Ally, they were prepared for a reaction of shock and despair, but instead they were met with an unsettling calmness. He appeared detached, as if the news of his wife's death had not affected him in the way they had expected. With a neutral expression, Jonathan claimed he had no idea what Elizabeth was doing in Louisiana, insisting that she often left without notice. However, the keen eyes of the investigators picked up on subtle signs, slight hesitation, rapid breathing, that suggested something was off. The way he carefully chose his words indicated an effort to maintain a consistent narrative. As the conversation progressed, the detectives started noticing glaring inconsistencies in Jonathan's account. He contradicted himself on simple details, such as the last time he had seen Elizabeth or their daily routines at home. When questioned about their relationship, he avoided eye contact and responded with vague phrases, showing clear discomfort. The investigators, experienced in detecting deception, knew that such behavior often pointed to hidden truths. Despite his composed demeanor, Jonathan could not conceal the small discrepancies that, little by little, became increasingly evident. Suspicions deepened when investigators began reconstructing Elizabeth's final days using phone records and statements from friends. Some of the information provided by Jonathan simply didn't align with known facts. His financial habits and travel records raised red flags, prompting the detectives to dig deeper. The growing feeling that Jonathan was hiding something became more apparent with every new lead, and the investigators were determined to uncover the truth lurking behind his carefully maintained facade. Elizabeth had always been a strong-willed woman, but in recent years, her life seemed like a constant battle against an overwhelming tide of problems. Close friends recalled how her relationship with Jonathan had gradually deteriorated, filled with frequent arguments and unbearable tension. The couple, once full of plans and hopes, found themselves drowning in financial difficulties that forced them to move in with Jonathan's grandmother, Gail. Elizabeth often complained about the hostile atmosphere in the house, where Gail's presence created an oppressive sense of control and disapproval. She felt like an outsider, unable to find peace within the walls of a home that never truly felt like hers. Living with Gail had become an even heavier burden for Elizabeth. She confided in her friends how Jonathan's grandmother constantly reminded her, at every opportunity, that she would never be good enough. Gail's stern gaze and cutting remarks left invisible scars that slowly chipped away at Elizabeth's self-esteem. Jonathan, on the other hand, did little to ease the situation. He seemed more concerned with his own frustrations and avoided confrontations whenever possible. For Elizabeth, the feeling of being trapped in an endless cycle of criticism and rejection was suffocating, and each day felt more unbearable than the last. When investigators heard these accounts, they began to wonder how much the toxic family environment had contributed to Elizabeth's tragic fate. Could the daily pressures, the feeling of isolation, and the financial struggles have driven her to desperate decisions? Or had they awakened something darker within Jonathan? The answers lay hidden within the walls of that house, between furtive glances and words left unsaid. Each detail painted a picture of silent suffering, which was slowly emerging to reveal a disturbing reality of loneliness and despair. When Jonathan Ally sat down with the detectives for questioning, he appeared composed, as if he had rehearsed every word. With a calm tone, he explained that Elizabeth had disappeared shortly after he left to pawn an item in order to pay off some overdue bills. According to him, it wasn't unusual for her to be gone when he returned, as she had a habit of disappearing for a few days without explanation. Jonathan insisted on this version with a disconcerting coldness that intrigued the investigators, who were well versed in detecting signs of deception. However, it didn't take long for the detectives to realize that something was amiss in his story. The dates he mentioned didn't align with the information provided by Elizabeth's friends and family. Moreover, the fact that he hadn't reported her disappearance raised serious suspicions. The way he narrated events with such a detached attitude starkly contrasted with the gravity of the situation. Anyone in his position would have shown at least some level of concern, yet Jonathan seemed more focused on keeping his story straight than on finding his wife. Determined not to be misled, the investigators began to build a more detailed profile of Jonathan's movements in the days leading up to Elizabeth's disappearance. They scrutinized bank statements, surveillance footage, and cell phone records for inconsistencies. With each new piece of evidence, more doubts arose. Was it possible that he knew more than he was letting on? The detectives knew they couldn't rely solely on his words. The real challenge was to uncover the proof that would expose the lies hidden beneath his carefully constructed facade. The investigation into Gail's whereabouts in the days leading up to Elizabeth's murder led detectives to a remote campsite surrounded by towering trees and winding trails. The place, quiet and filled with scattered RVs, seemed like the perfect retreat for someone seeking isolation. When questioned, Gail firmly maintained her story, stating that she had spent the last few days there, far removed from the tragic events that had unfolded. Her composed expression and carefully chosen words did not betray any sign of guilt, but the detectives knew that appearances could often be deceiving. Confirmation of her presence at the campsite came swiftly. The management provided detailed records, including check-in times, payment receipts, and even surveillance footage showing Gale in the common areas. The detectives, still cautious, meticulously analyzed the data, but everything pointed to the fact that she could not have been directly involved in the crime. This revelation brought a temporary sense of relief, but it also raised a pressing question. If Gale wasn't responsible, then who had brutally murdered Elizabeth? The mystery only deepened. With Gale ruled out as a suspect, the investigators turned their attention to other potential culprits. The toxic environment Elizabeth had lived in still remained a crucial piece of the puzzle. Friends and family continued to provide conflicting accounts, and the police worked tirelessly to paint a clearer picture of Elizabeth's final days. The financial pressures, ongoing family tensions, and lingering secrets that surrounded Gale's household suggested that the truth might be closer than they had initially thought. Shannon, Elizabeth's close friend, was one of the few people who knew the darkest secrets of her life. With a trembling voice and restless eyes, she revealed to investigators that Elizabeth had always been a vibrant woman full of dreams, but her relationship with Jonathan had slowly drained the life out of her. Shannon recalled with sadness the times Elizabeth showed up to work with visible bruises, marks hidden under long sleeves and eyes that tried to conceal the pain. She always said she had tripped, but we knew. You could see it in the way she spoke, in how she avoided eye contact, Shannon confided. The arguments at home were frequent, and the tension was always palpable. In addition to the physical and emotional abuse she suffered, Elizabeth sought refuge in the online world, where she met a man named Jason Swat from Oklahoma. According to Shannon, it started as a harmless distraction, but soon turned into something deeper. Elizabeth felt that Jason understood her in a way Jonathan never did. However, keeping the relationship a secret was a challenge, as Jonathan was extremely possessive and monitored her every move. Shannon remembered how Elizabeth's face would light up when talking about Jason, someone who made her feel alive again, despite the chaos she faced at home. Shannon's revelations gave investigators a new lead to follow. Could Jonathan have discovered the affair and acted out of jealousy? Or was Jason somehow involved? The messages exchanged between Elizabeth and her virtual lover became a crucial piece of the investigation, as detectives delved deeper into their connection. The story of a woman trapped in an abusive relationship, desperately seeking love in the shadows, added another layer of complexity to an already grim case. Elizabeth's eldest daughter, Rowan, was only 5 years old, but her words carried a weight far beyond her years. In a softly lit room filled with scattered toys to create a welcoming atmosphere, the little girl sat clutching a crayon while investigators gently guided her through her memories. "Daddy stopped the car in the dark," she said, her innocent voice making the air in the room feel heavier. As she spoke, the detectives realized they were listening to a crucial witness, someone who, without fully understanding the gravity of what had happened, could reveal the truth hidden beneath her father's carefully constructed lies. As the interview progressed, Rowan described how her father drove for hours that night, while she and her baby sister slept in the back seat. She remembered waking up when the car stopped in the middle of the road, surrounded by darkness and silence. "He got out and took Mommy from the trunk. She was sleeping," she said, swinging her legs slightly in a subconscious movement. Her words confirmed the investigators' worst fears. Elizabeth had been in the trunk the entire time. The innocence with which Rowan recounted the details was chilling, offering a glimpse into the horrific reality she had unknowingly been a part of. Rowan's testimony provided a shocking turn in the investigation. The detectives now had a clearer timeline, and their suspicions that Elizabeth had been transported lifeless in the trunk were solidified. As the child continued her story, alternating between confusion and an innocent acceptance of the events, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. Her words, spoken with the pure honesty only a child could have, became the final clue that investigators needed to close in on Jonathan and bring justice for Elizabeth. The detectives knew that to complete the puzzle, they needed solid evidence linking Jonathan directly to the crime scene. They meticulously combed through hours of surveillance footage from highways leading to Whiskey Bay. Among the endless stream of vehicles, a gray Nissan Versa caught their attention. A worn-out American flag sticker on the rear windshield confirmed it was Jonathan's car. The footage showed the vehicle crossing the bridge on the night of April 21, 2016, matching the estimated time of Elizabeth's death. Frame by frame, investigators noticed the car slowing down near the stretch where the body was discovered. A more detailed forensic analysis of the footage suggested that the car's trunk appeared weighted down, its uneven distribution hinting at something significant being transported. This crucial piece of evidence aligned perfectly with Rowan's testimony. Additional toll booth records confirmed Jonathan's route from Humble, Texas, to Whiskey Bay, leaving no doubt about his presence at the crime scene. With this new evidence, the noose tightened around Jonathan. The surveillance footage was undeniable proof that he had lied about his whereabouts. When presented to the prosecution, the footage painted a damning picture of a calculated act under the cover of night. Jonathan's carefully crafted alibi crumbled, and investigators were now armed with the evidence they needed to move forward with the case, determined to ensure that Elizabeth's tragic fate would not go unpunished. Jonathan's arrest opened a new and chilling chapter in the investigation. Within the cold, claustrophobic walls of his cell, he began to confide in a fellow inmate, perhaps seeking relief from his guilt or simply trying to impress. It was through this informant that detectives finally obtained a detailed confession of the crime. Speaking in a low voice and with a distant look, Jonathan revealed how everything unfolded that fateful night. He recounted how, while going through Elizabeth's phone, he found messages that made it clear she was involved with another man. Overcome with jealousy and resentment, he confronted her in a fit of uncontrollable rage, turning years of frustration into a brutal and irreversible act. Jonathan admitted that he strangled Elizabeth with his own hands, squeezing with such force that she had no chance to fight back. I squeezed until she stopped moving," he reportedly told the informant, his tone eerily devoid of emotion. But the horror didn't end there. Realizing what he had done, Jonathan panicked and decided to dispose of the body. He wrapped Elizabeth in a Christmas tree bag he had stored in their closet, as if attempting to bury his guilt under layers of deception and denial. The cruel irony of his choice of disposal, a symbol of celebration and warmth, contrasted sharply with the brutality of his actions. For investigators, the confession was the missing piece that tied the entire case together. Every chilling detail matched the forensic findings: the pressure marks on Elizabeth's neck, the traces of fibers found in the car's trunk. The informant's statement gave them an unfiltered glimpse into Jonathan's mind, a man driven by insecurity and possessiveness, who tried to cover his crime with a calculated facade. With the confession in hand, the authorities were finally able to move forward, knowing they now held the truth behind Elizabeth's tragic fate. Jonathan Ally had always been an unpredictable man, but the events leading to Elizabeth's death revealed an even darker side of his personality. He claimed that the crime was committed in a moment of uncontrollable rage after discovering messages on his wife's phone, exchanging affectionate words with another man. For Jonathan, it was the breaking point in a relationship already strained by distrust and resentment. Feeling betrayed and humiliated, he lost control and turned his pent-up anger into a brutal, irreversible act. What had once been subtle gestures of control in their daily life now culminated in Elizabeth's tragic end. However, the investigation uncovered that there was more behind Jonathan's actions than mere jealousy. Struggling under mounting debt and unable to keep the family's finances afloat, he resorted to desperate measures. Bank records revealed that, in the weeks leading up to the crime, Jonathan had pawned several of Elizabeth's belongings, including her jewelry and electronics, in an effort to ease his financial troubles. Friends reported that he had become increasingly withdrawn, avoided discussions about money, and showed signs of mounting frustration and despair. What initially seemed like a crime of passion was starting to take the shape of a calculated move to escape the overwhelming pressures in his life. Detectives began to believe that Elizabeth's murder wasn't just an impulsive act of rage, but a premeditated decision driven by desperation and an attempt to cover up his financial failures. Perhaps, eliminating Elizabeth wasn't just about revenge. It was a way for Jonathan to rid himself of his growing obligations and take advantage of her life insurance policy. The line between emotion and premeditation blurred with each new discovery, revealing that Jonathan wasn't just a jealous husband. He was a man cornered by his own mistakes, willing to do anything to regain control over his crumbling world. Jonathan's capture marked the conclusion of an intense manhunt that had kept investigators on high alert for weeks. He was apprehended at his home in Humble, Texas, without resistance. His expression was one of exhaustion and resignation, as if he had long known that the walls were closing in on him. His extradition to Louisiana took place amid public outrage and profound grief from Elizabeth's family. The case had garnered widespread attention, and many expected a lengthy and grueling trial that would expose the grim details of the couple's troubled relationship. In the courtroom, Jonathan faced an atmosphere heavy with emotion. The prosecution presented irrefutable evidence tying him to the crime, from surveillance footage to the chilling testimony of his own daughter. Prosecutors meticulously detailed how jealousy and obsession had driven him to commit such a brutal act. Sitting silently, Jonathan appeared cold, almost indifferent, avoiding eye contact with Elizabeth's family, whose faces were etched with a mixture of sorrow and anger. As the testimonies unfolded, his composed demeanor began to waver, but he remained firm, denying his involvement until the very last moment. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Jonathan eventually accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, thus avoiding a harsher sentence. The decision sparked mixed reactions. Some found solace in knowing he would spend 35 years behind bars, while others believed the punishment fell short of the gravity of the crime. As the judge delivered the sentence, he emphasized the cruelty of Jonathan's actions, declaring that no punishment could truly account for the impact of Elizabeth's tragic death. As Jonathan was led away in handcuffs, the silent tears of his children echoed through the courtroom, a painful reminder that, despite the legal closure, the emotional scars would remain forever. The court's decision to grant custody of Elizabeth's daughters to their paternal grandmother, Gail, was met with outrage from her side of the family. For them, Gail's home represented the same toxic environment that had trapped Elizabeth for years, and the thought of the girls growing up under the same roof was unbearable. In the courtroom, Elizabeth's parents sat in stunned silence, their expressions filled with sorrow and frustration. Losing their daughter was already devastating, but being denied the opportunity to raise their granddaughters in what they considered a loving and safe environment deepened their heartbreak. To them, the justice system had failed once again. Inside Gail's house, everything appeared normal on the surface, but investigators knew the reality was far more complex. The elderly woman, known for her stern demeanor and rigid views, took on the responsibility of raising the girls with a calculated detachment. She sought to shield them from the painful past, but the emotional wounds were too deep to ignore. Rowan, the eldest daughter, began asking difficult questions, struggling to understand why her mother was no longer there. Meanwhile, her younger sister, too little to grasp the full gravity of the situation, displayed signs of unease, searching in vain for the maternal presence she had lost. While Elizabeth's family continued to appeal the custody decision, hoping for a reconsideration, the future of the children remained uncertain. The fear that they would grow up in a home where trauma and grief were buried rather than addressed weighed heavily on their minds. For Elizabeth's loved ones, ensuring the girls' well-being was the only way to truly honor her memory. Each supervised visit with the children became bittersweet, a reminder of what had been taken from them and the relentless pursuit of justice that lay ahead. Elizabeth Ferrell's tragic death exposed deep wounds that extended far beyond her immediate family, resonating throughout the community and beyond. The case revealed how domestic violence can remain hidden for years, disguised by forced smiles and silent suffering. Friends and family, now looking back with clearer eyes, recognized the warning signs they had once overlooked: frequent excuses for bruises, sudden mood changes, and distant stares. In retrospect, it all made sense. Elizabeth's story served as a painful reminder of how fear and dependence can trap victims in cycles of abuse until it is too late. The investigation also highlighted the crucial role that technology plays in modern relationships. Elizabeth's involvement with a man she met online underscored the complexities of emotional escape in a digital age. It raised important questions about safety, privacy, and the human desire to seek comfort, even in the virtual world. Many who followed the case began reflecting on the risks of online relationships and how they can dangerously intertwine with reality. For investigators, every message, call, and online interaction provided invaluable clues that helped piece together Elizabeth's final days and the chain of events leading to her tragic fate. Most of all, it was a child's voice that ultimately unraveled the mystery. Rowan, with her innocent honesty, provided the key details that adults might never have uncovered on their own. Her testimony served as a stark reminder of the importance of listening to children, who often perceive the truth that grown-ups ignore. Elizabeth Ferrell's case is not just a story of tragedy but a lesson in vigilance, compassion, and action. How many other Elizabeths are still suffering in silence, hoping that someone will notice before it's too late? If you enjoyed this video and want to keep exploring scary and intriguing stories, don't forget to subscribe to the Spooky Stories channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any of the darkest mysteries and chilling events we share here. And, of course, leave your comment. Which part of this story gave you the biggest chills? Or is there a case you'd like us to cover? Share your ideas and join our community. And don't stop here. Click on the video now appearing on your screen and keep diving into the most spine-tingling stories we've selected just for you. With every click, you get closer to the unknown. And remember, here at Spooky Stories, fear is just the beginning.